Hey, Pastor, doesn't science disprove the Bible?
Isn't Genesis just a fairy tale?
Is God for real? Did he really create everything in 6 literal days?
Didn't God just use the Big Bang?
Why is there death and suffering? Do you really believe the Bible?
Didn't man evolve from apes?
For answers to these questions and more, stand by for Believing the Bible.
Welcome to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Dr. Carl Williams and our producer Ed Salzadell, all directors of the San Antonio Bible-Based Science Association. We are here to reassure you can believe the Bible from the very first verse. Today, we're going to touch upon the very delicate subject of eggs or sperm. Are they human? Or if we do form human-like cells in a petri dish, can it be grown to be a human being, and will it be a human being? The little clumps of cells in one experiment looked almost like human embryos, says one scientist. These were created from stem cells without eggs, sperm, or a womb. The embryo model had a yolk sac and a protoplacenta, resembling a state that real human embryos reach after approximately 14 days of development. It even secreted hormones and turned a drugstore pregnancy test positive. To Jacob Hanna, the experimenter's expert eye, the model wasn't perfect, more like a rough sketch. It had no chance of developing into an actual baby. But in 2022, when 2 students burst into his office and dragged him to a microscope to show him the cluster of cells, he knew his team had unlocked a door to understanding a crucial stage of human development. Hanna, a professor at Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, also knew the model would raise some profound ethical questions. As we get into this, guys, what do you think?
Well, let's start with stem cells right off the bat. They're using embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cell research is no longer funded at all by the U.S. government. However, non-governmental agencies can continue to do embryonic stem cell research. So the ethics of taking a human being, which 96% of biologists state a human being becomes a human being at the moment that the sperm fertilizes the female egg. From that moment on, it becomes a new person, a separate individual with a conglomeration of both the male and the female genetic material to become a being separate from either mother or father. So that person's entity has its own DNA that's separate from either parent and makes it a unique individual in the image of God. So that is number one. So any kind of experimentation that would disrupt that new person for the purpose of science should be prohibited because you're destroying a human life. That's number one. Okay, now it's already been done. We've already got the stem cells harvested from these embryos. What do you do with those stem cells? Should we trash them? Should they continue to be used? I don't know. That's a question that weighs on my mind. But that is what Professor Hanna is doing here. He's taking these stem cells that have already been harvested from embryos and trying to produce a human embryo. And the reason for this is that the human embryo is so difficult to monitor unless you know exactly where it starts and where it's growing. You won't be able to study its development.
But within the stem cells, you still have the DNA from whatever entity that was extracted from.
Right. In other words, it came from a human being. So
they didn't make their own DNA.
They didn't make their own DNA. So this stem cell is basically representative of a human being that has been torn apart. And one of its leftovers, if you will, are the called pluripotential stem cells, which can generate a wide variety, if not every human tissue in the body, if properly stimulated. So this embryo that's produced from a stem cell, is it human? And I would say yes. So you're basically playing with a human being's life whenever you're doing this. Is it ethically correct or ethically acceptable to do that? And I would say no.
A little bit of background on this. A fertilized egg morphs into a ball of cells and then a bean-shaped blob, and then ultimately something that looks like a baby. The truth is, though, that the earliest stages of human development are still very much a mystery. Early stage embryos are simply too small to observe with ultrasound. At 14 days, they are just barely perceptible to the naked eye. Keeping them alive outside the body for that long is very difficult. Whether anyone should is another matter, which is what the discussion we're having. For decades, scientific policy and regulation has held 14 days as the limit for how long embryos can be cultured in the lab. Now, this is one of the interesting things from this article that I did glean. Where did that 14 days come from?
It came from the United Kingdom. And again, it's one of those things where it's the stage in development of the embryo where it develops what's called the primitive streak. And the primitive streak is the basis, or it's the start of the central nervous system. And the central nervous system would imply that's when you have a brain, you have some sort of memory, you become a person. And that's what they say. At that point, the embryo has become a person. So the United Kingdom's government has pretty much redefined humanity as starting at 14 days rather than at inception.
But the 96 scientists that you said would recognize that when you have a
fertilized egg
that you already have a human being.
Correct.
Would debate that this 14-day period is simply an arbitrary
it is.
Place.
And how long ago was that when they decided on that? It wasn't just very recent.
Well, it's been over 20 years, probably 30 years or more.
And so our scientists now, when did they decide to come across the line going, this is a human being as opposed to it's just an entity?
People have been trying to cross those lines ever since this. That is the part of this moral debate, is how far you go with that. There was a researcher in China that went well beyond that and has been ostracized for that. You are listening to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Dr. Carl Williams at Ed Salzadell. If you would like to learn more, go to sabsa.org. That is SABBSA.org. Today we're talking about the moral implications and truth of what an embryonic stem cell that is being pushed into becoming a embryo and what all that entails. Now, what we were discussing just before the break was around the 14th day of embryonic development, a key stage in human growth called gastrulation kicks off. Cells begin to organize into layers that form the early buds of organs. The primitive streak, a developmental precursor of the spine, shows up. It is also at that point that an embryo can no longer become a twin. It is said there, and you become an individual.
That's the day 14 rule.
And that's where it came from. But as we also discussed, people have breached that on occasion.
Right.
Guys, what do you believe is actually there? I think you've already expressed it, Carl, that you have some belief system that this is already an individual.
Right. Well, we're playing with the remains of a human being when we work with embryonic stem cells. And there's lots of research now that shows that adult stem cells, in other words, anything beyond birth, can have the same potential as these embryonic stem cells can. So why aren't we doing more research on arguably a whole lot more available source of stem cells, in other words, from adults or even from babies on up, not from babies in the womb, but from babies from birth, from delivery on up to grave. You can get stem cells from people, and you can use those for research, and you can compensate the people for the use of their stem cells, whereas the baby, the embryo that is destroyed to get stem cells that's murder. That is death for that individual.
Hasn't there been some individuals where they've actually gone in and harvested a person's stem cells to do some multiplication to put them back into the system?
Oh yes, that's ongoing, but not this kind of. Not this kind of thing yet. Right. Okay. Although I'm not sure why it couldn't be. But anyway, but again, if you were able to, at this point, Professor Hanna says that the limit is about 18 days that this stem cell derived embryo will last before it just self-destructs. However, if it gets to the point where it goes beyond 18 days and becomes viable, what should be done? And is that person a human being? In my estimation, yes, that is a human being. So it should be protected as much as possible, regardless of whether it came from the standard natural conception, in other words, egg and sperm getting together. If you develop a human being from stem cells, that's still a human being.
Now let's talk about the two parts of why they even want to do this, why they may want to bridge the 14-day period, why they may want to move forward. Being able to observe these outside the womb, their hope is, and this is from the people who do have some moral ethics, their hope is that they will be able to figure out how diseases, deformations, and other things that happen badly with a pregnancy occur and therefore be able to prevent them.
Right.
But again, the question is, you're experimenting on a person when
Yes.
you do that.
Yeah. Again, the thing is, what happens with alcohol in pregnancy? What happens with infections in pregnancy? What happens? What causes the spontaneous abortions called miscarriages? What are the answers to these problems? And can this stem cell derived embryo, can it help solve that problem? Maybe, but then again, the other thing is, how do you even know that this stem cell derived embryo is going to progress at the same level or have the same kind of development that a normal embryo would have? So they're making a lot of assumptions. They can't really observe normal embryo. So using this stem cell derived embryo may lead them down the false path anyway.
There's a reason why these embryos don't survive beyond 14 to 18 days. They are not in the environment they were designed for. They're not being supported by the womb, which was designed for this. We have a lot of scripture that deals with this. Jeremiah 1:5, I formed you in the womb. That's God saying, I did this. It did not happen by accident. It did not happen in a test tube. Psalms 139, you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. And of course, this gets back to the question that goes back to the old Frankenstein movies. If you make this thing, will it have a soul?
Mm-hmm.
And will it have the nephesh, the life of God in it? And that's a great question. And it's also something that we can't answer because we can make neither.
We are not God.
We are not God.
Information for creation events in our area are on our website's calendar page. For more information or to schedule a presentation, go to sabsa.org or call 210-599-7240. When you go to our website, you can click on a link to our newsletter. Our website has a link for contact information on which you can order our newsletter to be emailed to you, or you can call us. Also go to whyshouldyoubelieve.com. That is Terry's website containing articles looking at current day issues from a biblical perspective. SABSA meets the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. We are now meeting at Faith Lutheran Church just south of the corner of Jones Maltzberger and Thousand Oaks. There you will find biblical apologetics and creation science teaching found nowhere else in Bexar County, as well as the availability of books and videos on these important subjects. If you missed any part of this show, you can listen to the show anytime by going to the AM 630 KSLR, the Word in South Texas website. Click on KSLR Podcast, scroll down until you find Believing the Bible. Please join us again next Saturday for Believing the Bible. I'm Scott Lane, and for Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and Ed Salzville, thanks for listening. And we hope you found today a reason to believe the Bible.